I never believed in haunted objects. Cursed ones, maybe. Stories of dolls or mirrors passed down through shady attics or musty basements. But those were ghost tales for campfires or late-night YouTube binges. I was a photography major, grounded in lenses, chemicals, and light. Paranormal didn't fit on the exposure triangle. It was a gray Saturday when I found the camera, the kind of day that smelled like wet leaves and cheap incense. I had wandered into the flea market just off campus, mostly for distraction. Finals were chewing through my brain, and I needed air that didn't taste like printer ink and stress. The vendor's booth was cluttered with old radios, rusted clocks, and a moth-eaten trench coat that might have belonged to a war veteran or a theater extra. The camera sat on a blood-red velvet cloth like it was the centerpiece of a dark altar. A solid hunk of brass and leather, with a dusty lens and a tiny silver dial that ticked when touched. "Good eye," the vendor said, startling me. He was rail-thin with a yellow grin that looked carved. She belonged to a gentleman in the 1920s, took only portraits of his daughter. Said the camera captured her soul just right. His voice cracked at the edges like old vinyl. I smirked, assuming it was part of the pitch. Still, something about the way he said captured gave me a chill. I lifted the camera, heavier than I expected, and looked through the dusty viewfinder. The world inside it looked older, like sepia had soaked into everything. I didn't haggle. I just paid the man and walked away, his grin following me long after I left his stall. Back in my dorm, I wiped down the lens and loaded a roll of black and white film I'd been saving. I was curious, romantic even. Antique things had stories. Maybe this camera would tell me one. I turned it toward the mirror and snapped a photo of myself, something I rarely did. Just a test. The flash was mechanical, almost like a sigh, and the camera whirred with unexpected smoothness. I set the film aside for developing in the lab the next morning. Sunday came, and I processed the negatives alone. It was peaceful, familiar. Watching the images form under the red light always felt like magic. But that day, the magic cracked. My test photo emerged clearly. Me standing in front of the mirror, expression bored, camera in hand. But over my left shoulder, faint but undeniably there, was a shape. A blur at first glance. But when I looked closer, really looked, I saw her. A young girl's face, translucent and still, gazing into the mirror. Not at me, not at the lens. Just gazing. Her hair looked like it belonged to another era, in tight curls or waves that framed her pale, narrow face. Her eyes weren't malevolent. They weren't even sad. Just there, like she'd been caught halfway between fading and appearing. I stared at the negative until the timer beeped. Even then, I didn't move. It had to be a trick of light. A smudge on the lens. Something explainable. Something rational. But even as I told myself that, the vendor's voice whispered in my head. He only took portraits of his daughter. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared, I told myself. Just curious, restless. I loaded the camera again. Tomorrow I'd take another shot. Another test. Just to be sure. I kept telling myself it was a trick of the light. A smudge. Maybe even some dust on the negative. I mean, that's all it could be, right? Ghost stories don't live in dark rooms. But even as I washed the print and hung it up to dry, my hands were shaking. That faint face over my shoulder, the girl's, didn't look like a mistake. It was too sharp, too specific. The shape of her jaw, the droop in her eyes, the slight curl of her lip. It looked deliberate. Still, denial is a stubborn comfort. I convinced myself I had overdeveloped the image. Or maybe some leftover image exposure from the flea market roll. I had to prove it wrong, to myself. So I reloaded the camera. Same setup, same mirror, same room. I even wiped the lens with more care than I'd ever given any of my gear. No excuses this time, just the truth. Click. The shutter sounded heavier this time, like it hesitated before snapping shut. The next morning, I developed the new film in the lab before class. I didn't want anyone else around. The second photo was nearly identical to the first. Same lighting, same room, same bored college student staring into the mirror. And there she was again. Only this time, she wasn't faint. She was clearer. Not fully solid, but enough that I could make out more detail. Her dress was old-fashioned, maybe turn of the century, frilled at the neck and buttoned at the wrist. Her eyes, no longer blank, were mournful, almost pained, like she knew I was seeing her and wished I hadn't. My stomach dropped. I enlarged the negative, brought it closer to the red glow of the darkroom lamp, squinting at her features. She looked about 10. Her mouth was slightly open, as if frozen mid-sentence. There was no smudge, no light leak, just her. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Instead, I dove into research. I wanted to know where this camera came from, what model it was. Maybe there was a logical explanation. But Google gave me nothing. The make and serial number engraved on the bottom didn't match any camera manufacturer I could find. Not Kodak, not Leica, nothing. No design even came close. I posted to vintage photography forums. A few people asked for pictures. I sent them. No replies. One account disappeared overnight. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept the camera on my desk, watching it like it might move on its own. And sometime around 3 a.m., I swear I heard a faint click, like a shutter. I turned on the light, heart racing, but the camera hadn't moved. I opened the back. The roll was untouched, but the air felt colder than it should have, and for the first time since buying it, I covered the camera with a cloth. I went to class the next day with bags under my eyes and a question spiraling in my head. What exactly had I brought into my dorm? I didn't tell anyone about the girl. It felt ridiculous to even think it. "There's a ghost in my camera," isn't the kind of sentence you can say without sounding like you've completely lost it, especially when you're in college, where logic and evidence are supposed to rule your life. But I couldn't ignore her either. Every night after class, I took more photos. At first, I kept them simple. A corner of my dorm, the empty desk, my window with the blinds half open. I wanted to disprove it. Prove to myself the first 2 shots were just freak occurrences. But she kept appearing. Always faint, but always there. In the window, her reflection layered over the glass. In my chair, seated like she belonged. In the darkened corners, her outline barely clinging to the shadows. Each time I developed the photos, she was clearer. Her hair draped neatly around her face now. Her eyes, they looked at me. Not at the camera. Me. As if she was studying me, waiting. I took a photo of the hallway outside my room. Just for contrast, I told myself. She wouldn't be there. She was. Not in the hallway, but in the reflection on the glass panel of a dorm fire extinguisher case. Her hand was lifted this time, palm open, like she was reaching. I stared at that image for an hour. My hands trembled. The edges of the photo curled in the heat of the lab, but I couldn't stop looking. Her fingers, they seemed desperate. Not angry, not violent, just pleading. I should have stopped, should have put the camera away. But curiosity is a powerful drug, especially when it's tangled with fear. A few nights later, I left the camera on the desk and let it face my bed. I wasn't even thinking clearly. Maybe I was hoping I'd wake up and find nothing. Maybe I was hoping to catch her in the act. I set the timer, climbed into bed, closed my eyes. When I developed that photo the next morning, my breath left my chest. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, right next to me. Her hands were folded in her lap, her head tilted slightly, almost affectionately. I was asleep, frozen mid-breath. And she looked like she'd been watching me for hours. I dropped the photo on the lab floor and backed away from the tray. Something warm crawled up my throat. I thought I might be sick. That night, my roommate Eric came back from a weekend trip. I didn't mention the girl. I couldn't. But as he unpacked, he paused and looked around the room. "Feels weird in here," he muttered. "Weird how?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I don't know. Like someone's watching." He laughed it off and turned back to his bag. "You been using incense or something?" I hadn't. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her sitting there. That same tilt of her head, that soft, haunting gaze. She wasn't just in the camera anymore. She was in my space, in my thoughts, and I had no idea what she wanted, but I could feel it, deep down. She wasn't finished with me yet, not even close. I couldn't sleep anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. Sometimes sitting beside me, sometimes reaching through the frame, and once I saw her just standing in the corner of the room. Still. Silent. Waiting. I had stopped taking selfies and mirror shots altogether. They were too intimate now, like I was letting her in. Instead, I started pointing the camera outward. Safe spaces. Empty ones. The hallway outside my dorm seemed harmless enough. Long, narrow, lit by flickering fluorescence. Just bricks, linoleum, and pipes. Nothing haunted about it. I set the camera up on a tripod, adjusted the focus, and triggered the shutter on a 10-second timer. Click. The sound echoed down the corridor, bouncing off cinder block walls. I felt a tightness in my chest but tried to ignore it. Just one more shot, I told myself. Just one. I developed the photo the next morning, hands cold from lack of sleep. When the image appeared in the tray, I blinked. No girl, no shadow, no reflection. Just two small, wet footprints. They were faint, but unmistakable. Prints left by bare feet. Small ones, the size of a child's. They led into the frame from the edge, but they stopped halfway down the hall, and then vanished. No smears, no exit marks. Just gone. I stared at the image, trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone walked barefoot down the hallway. Maybe some prank. But at 2 o'clock in the morning? And why would the prints show up in a photograph, but not in real life? I walked back to the hallway that afternoon. The floor was clean. No water. No residue. I checked again after dark, and again just before I went to bed. Still nothing. But around 3 a.m., I woke to a sound I couldn't ignore. Tap. 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 Light footsteps. Slow. Uncertain. Like a child walking carefully across tile. I sat up, heart pounding, ears straining. The hallway outside my door creaked faintly. I opened the door a crack. No one. But the sound had stopped. The next morning, I got out of bed, rubbing sleep from my eyes, and stepped into the hall. My socks soaked instantly. Wet prints. 2 of them. Right outside my door. They were tiny, just like in the photo. Bare feet, water darkened, perfectly outlined on the linoleum, and still fresh. They led toward my door, not away. I stood there, frozen, until someone down the hall opened their door and startled me back inside. I wanted to throw the camera away right then and there, smash it, burn it, anything. But I didn't. Some part of me still thought I could understand what was happening. That if I just took one more photo, I'd get an answer. Instead, I loaded another roll. The camera felt heavier than before. Not physically, emotionally, like it had seen too much. And I was just beginning to see it too. That night, I placed it on the floor, facing the hallway again. I didn't set a timer, I didn't trigger the shutter. But sometime in the middle of the night, it clicked anyway. I never touched it. The photo, when I developed it, was blurry, like the camera had moved on its own. But there, in the far left corner, behind a shadow cast by nothing I could identify, was the faint silhouette of a girl. Not just her face this time, her whole body. And for the first time, her head was turned directly toward the lens. Toward me. Toward us. The camera won't turn off anymore. I used to hear that gentle click only when I pressed the shutter. Now, it clicks whenever it wants. Sometimes in the middle of the night. Sometimes when I'm not even in the room. And the dial, the tiny silver one near the top, it spins on its own. Like it's choosing something, or someone. At first, I tried to laugh it off. Told myself it was some mechanical malfunction. A wiring issue. Maybe the age of the thing catching up with it. But this camera isn't electric. It has no battery, no power source. Nothing to spin, nothing to click unless you do it manually. And yet, here I am, sitting on the edge of my bed, listening to the soft tick, tick, click of the shutter as it moves all on its own from inside the drawer I locked it in. I should throw it away. I want to. But I'm stuck, like it's pulling something out of me, and I need to know what. Last night, I gave in again. I stood in front of the mirror, the same way I did that very first night, and lifted the camera. I tried to steady my hand, to calm my racing heart, and I took a photo. One more. When I developed the film, I nearly dropped the tray. She was there, not faint, not distant, full-bodied. Her pose mimicked mine. Camera raised, head tilted slightly, right eye squinting into the viewfinder. But her eyes, they weren't looking into her own reflection. She was looking straight into mine. Her lips were parted. Her expression was no longer mournful or scared. It was aware. She knew what she was doing. Later that night, I dreamt of an old house, a white wooden one with shutters and creaking floors. Inside, I found a child's room. Faded wallpaper with yellowing flowers, a porcelain doll missing an eye, and a bed with a carved wooden frame. There was a camera on the desk. Not mine, but close. And from somewhere in the house, I heard it. Not just the click of the shutter, but a soft weeping. A woman's voice. She sobbed like her soul had been torn from her chest. When I woke, I was drenched in sweat, my fingers clenched tight around the edge of my blanket, and the camera, the antique one, was sitting on the foot of my bed. I hadn't left it there. I never sleep with it near me. It had taken a photo. I could tell. The film dial had moved ahead a frame. I hadn't touched it. But what shook me more than anything else was what started happening during the day. I saw her. Not in photographs. Not through a lens. But in real life. In the surface of my coffee. In a car window as it passed. In the sheen of my laptop screen when it went black. Always just for a second. Always just long enough for my heart to jump into my throat. She was bleeding into the world. I don't know how or why, but she's trying to cross over. And the camera, that cursed thing, it's her bridge. And I keep carrying it. I keep using it. Because no matter how scared I get, there's a question echoing louder than the shutter clicks in my head. Who was she? And what happened to her? The dreams were getting more vivid. Every night now, I found myself wandering that same decaying house. The one with the peeling wallpaper and dust-thick air. Always, the same child's bedroom waited at the end of the hallway. Same carved headboard. Same cracked doll staring blindly from the dresser. And always, I heard her. A woman sobbing, choked, raw. It filled the walls like wallpapered grief. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't dreaming at all. Like I was remembering something that had never happened to me. Until one day, in real life, I saw it. It was raining. I was walking across campus with my hoodie up, trying to avoid eye contact with the living world, when I passed a side door of the old West building. It had been condemned years ago, a relic of the college's past. But as I glanced through one of the broken window panes, my breath caught the wallpaper. I didn't even think. I ducked under the yellow caution tape and slipped through the unlocked maintenance door. The hallway inside was silent and freezing, like the air had been preserved since the 1930s. I found the room at the end of the hall, and it was exactly as I remembered. The same warped floorboards, the same floral wallpaper, faded to rot, the bed, the dresser, the doll. It wasn't just a dream. I had been here. Or more accurately, she had. On the wall, nailed unevenly above the dresser, hung a cracked picture frame, its glass smeared with time. I wiped it clean. The photograph inside was grainy, aged and browned at the edges. But there she was, the girl, standing straight in front of the camera, hands clasped, wearing the same dress I'd seen in all my photos. She looked younger here, smaller. Beside her stood a tall man in a suit, likely her father. His hand rested on her shoulder, but it had been burned out of the image. literally. The emulsion around his face and arm was bubbled, blackened, like someone had torched just that part of the photo in rage. I pulled open a trunk by the foot of the bed. Inside were yellowing dresses, old photographs, film canisters, even a worn toy rabbit with one glass eye. All of it looked untouched for decades. I knelt, hands trembling, and that's when it happened. From inside my backpack. Click. The shutter. I hadn't touched the camera. I opened the bag, and there it was. The antique camera resting at the top, film already wound forward, as if waiting for the next shot. I hadn't loaded it. I hadn't even opened the bag since I left the dorm. It had taken a photo. I looked around the room. Nothing had changed, but I felt it. The air was denser, heavier. The sobbing that had haunted my dreams felt closer now, like it had been trapped in the walls for years and had finally been let out. I left the room quickly, clutching the camera close, not because I wanted to, but because it felt like it had led me there, like it wanted me to see. Back in my darkroom, I developed the image it had taken, and it nearly broke me. The photo showed me, kneeling at the trunk, but the angle was impossible, like it had been taken from the ceiling. I was in focus, but she was in the background, the girl, standing beside the dresser, looking directly into the lens. This time, she wasn't translucent. She was there, solid, real, and she was smiling. But it wasn't a joyful smile. It was the kind of smile someone wears when they know something you don't, something you won't want to know. I don't know what I thought would happen. Maybe I believed she would finally go away if I ignored her. Maybe I hoped the camera would break, burn out, die on its own, but it didn't. It never did. It kept clicking. It followed me into my sleep, into every reflective surface I passed. Mirrors, puddles, microwave doors. She was always there, just behind me, closer each time. By the time I returned to the darkroom, I had already made my decision. One last photo. One final attempt to face her, understand her, or end it. I set up the mirror again, same as I did that first night. I loaded a fresh roll of film, my hands trembling more than I'd like to admit. The camera felt heavier now, like holding a loaded weapon. I centered myself in the mirror. My own eyes looked hollow, older than they should. "Who are you?" I whispered. Click. The sound rang out like a gunshot. The next morning, I developed the film in silence. No music, no background noise, just the faint hum of the enlarger and my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The image emerged slowly, painfully. It was me, standing in front of the mirror, holding the camera. But I wasn't alone. She stood behind me, not a blur, not a faint shape, a full, solid figure. The same girl I had seen from the beginning. Now so vivid she looked more real than I did. Her arm draped around my shoulder like an old friend, her face inches from mine. But what made my chest seize wasn't the way she stared at the lens. It was her mouth. It was open, mid-sentence, lips caught in motion, trying to say something. Maybe a name, maybe a warning, maybe a plea. I leaned closer, desperate to read her expression. That's when I noticed something else. In the reflection of the mirror, faint but visible, I could see another figure, standing far in the background. A tall man, shadowed, watching. The same shape burned out of the photo in that bedroom. I stumbled back from the tray, heart racing, unable to breathe. But the horror wasn't over. Because as I reached for the next negative, I realized something was wrong. I hadn't taken any more photos. I had only taken one. But the film had advanced 2 frames. I developed the next one, hands shaking. It was a photo of me, sleeping. My face was slack with exhaustion, turned toward the wall. My arms were wrapped around my pillow. The camera, the one I had locked inside my desk, was nowhere near my bed. No one else had taken that picture. But there it was, perfectly focused, perfectly composed. The frame after that was black. The dial wouldn't move anymore. The camera sat still, silent, like it had finally gotten what it wanted. That afternoon, I walked to the river behind campus. The water was high from the rain, rushing, alive. I didn't hesitate. I wound my arm back and threw the camera with everything I had. It spun in the air, hit the water with a splash, and disappeared into the current. Gone. I stood there until my fingers went numb, waiting to feel something. Relief. Release. Anything. But I didn't. Because that night, I developed the negatives one last time. And even without the camera, she was still there. In every frame. Watching. Always watching. And now I know. It was never about the camera. It was about me. She chose me, and I will never take another photo again. Not without wondering who else might be standing behind me.